Imagine pouring icy cucumber water for the woman who destroyed your life. While she complains your breathing ruins her aura. I spent 18 months in a cheap uniform, scrubbing saunas and becoming completely invisible. But invisibility is a spectacular superpower when you are secretly buying the land beneath their $500 a round golf course. By the time they feel the mud on their designer shoes, I will already own the entire swamp. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Claire Robinson. I am 32 years old, and for the past 18 months, my official job title has been Cabana Attendant at the Elysium Atoll. It is an ultra-exclusive, fiercely guarded private golf and resort club perched on the jagged, sun-bleached cliffs of the California coast. Here, the air always smells intensely of sea salt and crushed eucalyptus leaves, and the membership initiation fee alone could buy a small private island. My daily uniform consists of a cheap, stiff cotton polo shirt that scratches my skin raw at the collar, and a shapeless beige skirt that renders me entirely invisible to the people I serve. Priscilla Vance does not see me. To her, I am merely an extension of the imported teakwood furniture. She is the wife of Sterling Vance, the ruthless chief executive officer of the data technology conglomerate Aegis Horizon. Priscilla strides into the spa pavilion like she owns the very oxygen we are all breathing. She collapses onto a pristine white lounger, huffing in dramatic exasperation. Without so much as glancing in my direction, she flings her oversized, diamond-encrusted designer sunglasses directly onto my silver serving tray. The heavy frames slam against the metal, nearly knocking over a crystal pitcher of iced cucumber water. "God, do you have to wear that offensive scent?" she snaps, her voice grating and sharp. She waves a perfectly manicured hand in front of her face as if warding off a plague. "It smells like a cheap drugstore bargain bin. Stand further away. Your heavy breathing is completely ruining my aura." "I apologize, Mrs. Vance," I say. My voice is perfectly smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of any human emotion. I take one precise step backward, melting further into the shadows of the cabana. As I stare at the condensation dripping down the side of the crystal pitcher, the icy chill transports me back exactly 3 years. 3 years ago, I did not wear rough polyester. I wore tailored linen suits and walked the lush green grounds of my own rising boutique eco-resort. It was a sanctuary, built on the principles of sustainability and absolute peace. But Sterling Vance wanted my prime coastal land for a massive, soulless corporate retreat. When I flatly refused his aggressive buyout offers, he unleashed his ultimate weapon, Priscilla. She did not just negotiate, she annihilated. Priscilla bypassed lawyers and went straight to the gutter. She hired a shadow public relations firm to orchestrate a massive, completely fabricated smear campaign. They planted fake environmental reports of toxic waste dumping at my pristine eco-resort. They paid off local bloggers in cash, bribed regional inspectors to look the other way, and flooded the national media with horrific lies. My bookings dropped to absolute zero within 2 agonizing months. My loyal investors panicked and pulled out. Bankruptcy hit me like a runaway freight train. I lost my beautiful business, my family home, and was buried under a mountain of insurmountable debt. They took everything from me, destroying my life, simply because I dared to say no. Back in the sweltering heat of the luxury cabana, I silently bend down to pick up Priscilla's discarded, sweat-stained luxury towels. The ultra-rich possess a very unique, insidious brand of cruelty. It is not just about hoarding wealth. It is about actively ensuring those without it feel the crushing, daily weight of their own insignificance. They drop their trash on the floor knowing someone else will be forced to bend down and retrieve it. They spill wildly expensive champagne on purpose and sit back to watch the help scramble to scrub the porous Italian marble on their hands and knees. I wipe down the eucalyptus wood benches, forcefully scrubbing away the dead skin, the spilled tanning oil, and the sheer entitlement they leave behind. I am a ghost in this sprawling resort. I clean their disgusting messes. I hear their whispered, drunken secrets, and I endure their casual degradation with a bowed head and a blank stare. But they are completely unaware that ghosts can haunt. At the end of my grueling shift, I retreat to the cramped, fluorescent-lit staff locker room, hidden deep in the basement. I open locker number 42 and reach past my spare, unwashed uniform to pull out a thick, leather-bound notebook. This object is my actual life's work. For 18 excruciating months, I have been meticulously documenting every single move the Vance family makes. My handwriting fills hundreds of pages with razor-sharp, precise details. I have logged their hidden financial loopholes. The illegal corporate kickbacks Sterling loudly discusses on his phone, while he assumes I am just a brainless servant folding his towels. And the strict internal club regulations they blatantly violate on a daily basis. I have recorded the exact dates when Priscilla tipped the club manager in thousands of dollars of undeclared cash to bump other elite members off the prime tennis courts. I have documented the specific times Sterling utilized the club's secure wireless network to access offshore accounts and hide his personal tech assets from federal regulators. I have tracked the putrid flow of their dirty money right under their arrogant, upturned noses. I slip the heavy notebook back into the dark corner of the metal locker and lock it with a deeply satisfying click. Walking out into the dimly lit carpeted hallway, I stop in front of the large two-way mirror that separates the hidden staff corridor from the extravagant main VIP lounge. Through the tinted glass, I can clearly see Sterling and Priscilla clinking their crystal champagne flutes, throwing their heads back in laughter, celebrating another hollow, unearned victory. My eyes narrow, turning as cold and sharp as shattered glass. I pull out my highly encrypted smartphone. I open a secure, untraceable messaging application and select a hidden group chat containing 3 former billionaires. 3 powerful men who were ruthlessly scammed, humiliated, and discarded by Sterling Vance 5 years ago. Men who have been waiting in the shadows for the perfect opportunity to strike back. I type a single, decisive message. The target is bleeding. Phase 1 is complete. Prepare the funds. I press send. The screen goes dark in my hand. My reflection in the two-way mirror shows a woman who has spent 3 long years walking barefoot through hell, only to return to the surface as the devil herself. My access keycard beeped softly against the electronic lock of the club manager's private office. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. At this hour, the only sounds were the distant crashing of the ocean and the low mechanical hum of the centralized air conditioning units. Being the lowest-ranking staff member granted me the ultimate security clearance, the absolute authorization to enter empty rooms to collect the trash. I slipped inside, locked the heavy oak door behind me, and immediately pulled a miniature, high-speed document scanner from the deep pocket of my canvas cleaning apron. The manager, an arrogant man who relied entirely too heavily on his impressive title, was incredibly sloppy. In his physical trash bin, buried beneath layers of crumpled dining receipts and empty espresso cups, I found the discarded printouts of the club's quarterly financial ledgers. I smoothed the wrinkled papers on the dark mahogany desk and scanned them instantly. Then, using a hidden administrative password I had shoulder-surfed from him weeks ago, I bypassed the firewall and accessed the internal wireless network. What I uncovered was a complete financial bloodbath. The Elysium Atoll was rapidly hemorrhaging cash. The elite board of directors, driven by sheer arrogance and unmitigated greed, had secretly funneled massive portions of the club's reserve operational funds into highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrency markets. When the digital asset markets crashed spectacularly last autumn, the private club lost tens of millions of dollars practically overnight. They were financially drowning, taking out heavily leveraged, high-interest loans just to keep the vintage champagne flowing and the luxury facilities operating without alerting the wealthy membership. But financial ruin was not enough to secure my victory. I needed a fatal structural flaw. I needed a weapon of absolute destruction. Digging deeper into the encrypted zoning and environmental files, I finally discovered the club's ultimate Achilles heel. The breathtaking 18-hole championship golf course and the sprawling, world-class luxury spa complex were built entirely on a foundation of lies. They were constructed illegally over a federally protected coastal wetland zone. To maintain the vibrant green grass of the fairways and the endless flowing waterfalls of the spa, the club relied on a massive, highly exclusive freshwater extraction permit granted decades ago under shady circumstances. And that critical water permit was set to expire in exactly 45 days. Because of their illegal construction over the wetlands, the board of directors could not simply apply for a public municipal renewal without immediately triggering a massive environmental audit by the state government. A public audit would expose the severe wetland violations, leading to the immediate closure of the grounds and catastrophic federal fines that would instantly bankrupt the organization. They were trapped in a legal nightmare, desperately trying to bribe local municipal officials under the table to quietly extend their water rights before the entire resort ran completely dry. Armed with these devastating digital files, I requested a rare weekend off from my cleaning duties. I drove 300 miles inland to a private, dimly lit boardroom located inside a high-security corporate facility. Sitting across the polished glass table were the three powerful men I had messaged days earlier. Three former billionaires whose global corporate empires and personal reputations had been systematically dismantled and devoured by Sterling Vance during a hostile tech takeover 5 years ago. They were angry, incredibly wealthy, and starving for absolute retribution. I did not offer them apologies or empty promises. I offered them a highly calculated, foolproof corporate execution. I projected the club's internal financial ledgers and the expiring water permit documents onto the large presentation screen. I explained that we did not need to fight Sterling Vance in the public stock market or the crowded courtrooms. We simply needed to pull the literal ground out from under his most prized social sanctuary. I proposed the immediate creation of an untraceable, offshore shell company. We would call it Nemesis Tide Holdings. The three men leaned forward in their leather chairs, their eyes gleaming with cold, calculated vindication as I outlined the ruthless financial mechanics. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, they had committed a combined total of $50 million in untraceable liquid capital to fund the entire operation. Within 72 hours, Nemesis Tide Holdings became a terrifying ghost entity moving silently through the global banking system, utilizing a complex web of offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The shell company began aggressively purchasing the club's toxic debt from panicked secondary commercial lenders. We bought their property mortgages, their luxury equipment leases, and their outstanding operational loans at steep, distressed discounts. Every single financial transaction was heavily masked behind impenetrable layers of corporate anonymity. My name appeared on absolutely nothing. Legally, I was still just a minimum-wage cabana attendant scrubbing porcelain toilets. But in the unseen shadows of the financial world, I was rapidly becoming the absolute majority debt holder of the Elysium Atoll. We were slowly tightening a financial noose around their collective necks, and they could not even feel the heavy rope. Back at the coastal resort, the blazing afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the artistic, hand-painted ceramic tiles bordering the massive infinity pool. I was back in my scratchy beige uniform, holding a heavy plastic bucket of chlorinated cleaning water. Priscilla Vance lounged on a floating cabana bed, surrounded by a flock of her sycophantic, wealthy friends. She was lazily applying a ridiculously expensive, imported sun protection lotion to her shoulders. With a careless flick of her wrist, a single, thick white drop of the lotion plummeted and hit the pristine blue tile floor. She paused, looking down at the tiny white smudge, and then locked her piercing, hateful gaze directly onto me. "You," she commanded, her voice slicing sharply through the tranquil poolside music. "You missed a spot. Right here." She pointed her perfectly manicured finger directly at the single drop of lotion. She did not ask me to fetch a towel. She wanted a public performance of submission. I walked over, slowly lowered myself to my bare hands and knees on the scorching hot ceramic tiles, and began to wipe the tiny drop with a thick white cloth. I could hear her friends snickering softly and whispering cruel jokes above my head. "Make sure you get it all," Priscilla sneered, taking a slow, arrogant sip of her iced pink cocktail. Some people just do not understand the basic concept of thoroughness. As I knelt there on the burning floor, bowing before the very woman who had ruthlessly stripped me of my dignity and my livelihood 3 years ago, a sharp, rhythmic vibration pulsed against my thigh. It was my encrypted smartphone, hidden deep within my uniform pocket. I finished wiping the pristine tile, stood up slowly, and retreated to the shaded towel distribution kiosk, away from their prying eyes. I pulled out the sleek device, the screen illuminated brightly with a single, highly encrypted banking notification. The final international wire transfer had cleared. Nemesis Tide Holdings had just successfully purchased the exclusive groundwater rights for the entire coastal peninsula, legally intercepting the club's expiring permit out from under them. I looked back up at Priscilla, who was busy throwing her head back and laughing loudly at another guest. The massive steel trap was now completely set. I now legally owned the very water beneath her designer shoes. Now that the massive financial trap was set in the dark, I decided it was time to have a little fun in the light. Psychological warfare against the ultra-rich does not require complex, heavy weaponry. It merely requires minor, highly targeted inconveniences. For people who have never been told no in their entire lives, a slight delay in service is tantamount to a violent physical assault. First, I adjusted the automated tennis booking algorithm. Priscilla fiercely guarded her 8 o'clock morning court time. To her, it was a sacred ritual, but suddenly, the software developed a bizarre, localized glitch specifically attached to her membership profile. Every single time she logged in to request the cool morning slot, the system automatically rejected it and bumped her down to the brutally hot 2 o'clock afternoon slot. I stood quietly in the shade of the cabana, thoroughly enjoying the sight of her stumbling across the clay court in 100-degree heat. Her expensive, supposedly waterproof makeup melted down her furious red face like a sad, abstract painting. Then came the culinary sabotage. Using my new backdoor access to the club procurement system, I quietly rerouted the Vance family's standing luxury orders. When Priscilla hosted a highly publicized luncheon for her elite circle of wealthy wives, the club's panicked sommelier had to inform her that her favorite vintage French champagne and her imported Russian caviar were inexplicably stuck at the commercial shipping port. Instead, the terrified staff was forced to serve her table a domestic sparkling wine and a highly questionable, pale domestic trout roe. Watching Priscilla try to choke down second-tier appetizers while her wealthy friends exchanged looks of profound, patronizing pity was a masterclass in high society humiliation. One of the women even leaned over and loudly whispered, asking if Sterling's company was facing sudden budget cuts. Priscilla looked as though she had been served literal poison. Sterling did not fare any better. On a Tuesday afternoon, he hosted a massive technology merger meeting in the exclusive Diamond VIP boardroom. With a few taps on my hidden encrypted phone, I isolated the smart climate control system for that specific room. While the rest of the luxurious clubhouse remained at a crisp 68 degrees, the Diamond boardroom steadily climbed to a stifling 90 degrees. Sterling, suffocating in his bespoke three-piece wool suit, began to sweat profusely. By the time he reached the climax of his major presentation, massive, dark moisture stains had bloomed beneath his armpits and spread entirely across his custom Italian silk shirt. His billionaire investors looked at him with sheer disgust, completely distracted by his frantic, messy wiping of his dripping forehead. He looked less like a brilliant tech visionary and more like a guilty criminal rapidly breaking under police interrogation. The compounding, relentless inconveniences drove Priscilla completely unhinged. She transformed the elegant club lobby into her own personal, chaotic war zone. She screamed violently at the front desk clerks, hurled heavy leather menus at the waiters, and relentlessly demanded mass staff firings on a daily basis. She shrieked that everyone around her was an incompetent idiot, her shrill voice echoing off the expensive marble pillars. The entire resort fell under a dark, suffocating cloud of anxiety. Staff members were crying in the break rooms, and other elite club members began to complain loudly to the board about the toxic, unbearable atmosphere the Vance family was constantly creating. This widespread panic was exactly the distraction I needed to position myself perfectly for the final strike. Amidst the swirling chaos, I stepped forward from the shadows as the humble, tirelessly efficient servant when the kitchen staff was in tears. I calmly mopped the floors and reorganized their disrupted supply closet. When the club manager was hyperventilating in his office, utterly terrified of being fired by the angry board of directors, I quietly handed him an ice water and gently suggested a brilliant temporary scheduling fix for the dining room. I became his quiet, reliable anchor in the storm. He became so entirely dependent on my steady presence that during a massive database failure that I had secretly caused, he panicked and shoved his master administrative tablet directly into my hands. He begged me to fix the screen while he took a frantic phone call. In less than 60 seconds, I had securely copied the master password to the entire membership management database into my own hidden device. Later that afternoon, a furious, severely sunburned Priscilla stomped into the locker room hallway after another brutal afternoon tennis match. She carelessly dropped her designer gym bag, spilling her expensive belongings across the floor. I knelt down silently and began to gather her items. Priscilla glared down at me, her chest heaving with misplaced, vicious rage. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a crumpled wad of $5 bills and threw them violently, striking me squarely in the face. The paper money fluttered pathetically to the floor around my knees. "Pick it up, you useless parasite," she spat, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "That is all you people know how to do. Scavenge for our scraps." I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I simply smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and calmly gathered the small bills from the floor. I let her have her cheap, pathetic insults. I could endure absolutely anything now, because I knew the clock was ticking. There were exactly 48 hours left until her grand Ocean Charity Gala. It was the most important night of her entire social year, and I now held the keys to the entire kingdom. The Ocean Charity Gala was universally recognized as the undisputed pinnacle of the coastal elite social calendar. On this particular Saturday night, the grand ballroom was completely transformed. Priscilla stood squarely under the towering $1 million crystal chandelier, draped in a custom silk gown that easily cost more than most working families earned in 2 full decades. However, tonight was not actually about saving the oceans or raising money for charity. It was a highly calculated, extravagant theatrical production designed for one single purpose. Sterling needed to project an image of absolute, unshakable wealth to successfully secure a massive corporate merger with a table full of skeptical international tech investors. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with powerful politicians, ruthless hedge fund managers, and arrogant tech barons. I moved silently among them all, having temporarily traded my rough daytime polo shirt for the crisp black vest, perfectly tailored trousers, and stiff white button-down shirt of the elite evening banquet staff. I carried a heavy silver tray, carefully serving sparkling water while closely watching the invisible poison I had planted begin to take its devastating effect. At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, utilizing my supreme, unchallenged authority as the majority debt holder of Nemesis Tide Holdings, I had executed a hard, irrevocable freeze on every single corporate credit line the resort possessed. I intentionally blocked all final vendor payments to the elite floral designers, the artisanal ice sculptors, and the primary luxury seafood distributors. The cracks in their meticulously crafted, opulent facade appeared almost immediately. Without the final wire transfers clearing, the backup delivery trucks had simply turned around on the highway and driven away. The massive, intricately carved oceanic ice sculptures framing the main entrance began to melt rapidly under the punishing heat of the warm ballroom spotlights. The frozen art lost its shape, pooling into dangerous, slippery puddles of dirty water on the polished imported marble floor, because there were absolutely no fresh replacements waiting in the kitchen freezers. Then came the highly anticipated dinner service. Instead of the promised line-caught Maine lobster tails resting on beds of saffron risotto, the desperate, completely panicked kitchen staff was forced to hurriedly defrost cardboard boxes of cheap, rubbery, farm-raised cocktail shrimp purchased from a local discount warehouse just hours prior. I stood against the wall and watched the horrified, insulted expressions of the billionaires as they chewed the tough, flavorless seafood. I could hear a prominent venture capitalist at table 4 loudly ask his wife if Sterling Vance was secretly filing for bankruptcy. The suffocating tension in the room snapped completely when the master audio system failed. Just as Sterling proudly took the center stage to make his grand, arrogant keynote speech to his prospective international merger partners, the microphones let out a deafening, high-pitched screech. The agonizing electronic feedback echoed violently through the massive acoustic ballroom, forcing the wealthy guests to drop their silver forks and cover their ears in genuine physical pain. Whispers erupted immediately, spreading like wildfire across the tables. I saw prominent socialites pulling out their expensive smartphones, discreetly recording the melting, deformed ice, the untouched plates of rubbery pink shrimp, and Sterling standing awkwardly on the silent, unlit stage, tapping a dead microphone. They were laughing. The almighty, untouchable Vance family was being publicly documented as a total, humiliating failure in front of the very people they desperately needed to impress. Priscilla felt the crushing, undeniable weight of the collective mockery. Her carefully constructed empire of absolute social dominance was crumbling rapidly right before her eyes, and she began to panic like a trapped animal. She frantically scoured the room, her eyes wide and wild, desperately searching for anyone beneath her to blame for her utter public disgrace. Her vicious, bloodshot gaze locked directly onto me just as I was carefully clearing a stack of untouched dinner plates from a VIP table near the exact center of the room. She stormed aggressively across the wet marble floor, her expensive high heels clicking sharply against the stone. Without a single word of warning, she violently snatched a full glass of dark, vintage red wine from a passing waiter and hurled the entire contents directly at my face. The cold liquid splashed violently into my eyes, temporarily blinding me. The dark wine stained my crisp white uniform shirt a deep, horrific blood red, dripping heavily from my chin, down my neck, and splashing onto my polished black shoes. "You," Priscilla screamed, her shrill voice cracking hysterically over the murmuring, shocked crowd. She pointed a trembling finger inches from my nose. "You did this, you incompetent, useless little bitch. Security drag this garbage out of my sight right now." The entire grand ballroom fell completely silent. The sheer, unhinged vulgarity of her physical outburst shocked even the most ruthless corporate sharks in the room. Nobody moved. Off to the side of the room, Sterling was practically vibrating with fury, utterly humiliated by his wife's screaming tantrum and the disastrous presentation. He stormed over to the terrified club manager standing behind the main point of sale counter near the lobby doors. Sterling aggressively slammed his exclusive solid titanium black credit card onto the glass counter. "Charge my personal account for 50 bottles of the reserve vintage champagne from the private underground cellar immediately," he commanded through gritted teeth. His face flushed red as he desperately tried to salvage the ruined evening. The manager, trembling uncontrollably, picked up the heavy metal card and swiped it swiftly through the computerized system. The machine beeped harshly. The digital screen did not show the standard green approval checkmark. Instead, a bright, flashing red error message illuminated the terrified manager's pale face. The bold text glared into the dimly lit room for anyone standing close enough to see. "Account locked by new owner." The suffocating silence that hung in the grand ballroom following the violently declined credit card was suddenly shattered by the sound of frantic, heavy footsteps. The club manager, whose face had completely drained of all color until it resembled the melting, pathetic ice sculptures out in the lobby, sprinted clumsily away from the front desk. He did not care about the flashing red error message anymore. He ran directly onto the center of the grand ballroom floor, completely ignoring the elite, unspoken social protocols he usually worshipped. He skidded to a halt in front of Sterling, gasping violently for air as if he had just run a marathon. "Mr. Vance," the manager stammered, his voice heavily amplified in the dead quiet room. "The master utility grid, it just went offline. The entire resort's fresh water supply, the commercial kitchen valves, the luxury spa feeds, and the massive underground irrigation system for the 18-hole golf course. Every single drop of water has been completely shut off from the main municipal pumping station." A wave of confused, angry murmurs washed over the wealthy crowd. Sterling grabbed the terrified manager by the lapels of his expensive suit. "Then call the city and have them turn it back on," he roared, his voice cracking with pure desperation. But that was the brilliant, fatal trap. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, the cold red wine dripping slowly from my chin, savoring the absolute genius of the execution. I never actually bought the Elysium Atoll. Buying the club would have meant absorbing their toxic, catastrophic debt, their failed cryptocurrency gambles, and their severe operational mismanagement. That would be a fool's errand. Instead, using Nemesis Tide Holdings, I quietly purchased the physical foundation beneath them. I bought the absolute, exclusive ownership rights to the protected coastal wetlands and the singular privately owned water supply station that fed the entire peninsula. The luxury club was nothing but an empty, heavily mortgaged shell built on land they no longer legally controlled. Without my water, their $500 a round golf course would turn to dead brown dirt in exactly 3 days. Without my water, the imported marble toilets would not flush. The commercial dishwashers could not clean, and their private oasis was instantly transformed into a worthless, uninhabitable desert. The profound reality of the situation rapidly dawned on the surrounding executives. The lead international tech investor, the incredibly wealthy man Sterling had spent the last 6 months desperately courting for a massive corporate merger, stepped forward from his VIP table. He looked at the melting ice, the cheap frozen shrimp on his plate, the humiliated, sweating CEO, and the unhinged, screaming wife, with a look of absolute, icy disgust. The billionaire calmly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and retrieved the thick, professionally bound preliminary merger contract. Without uttering a single word of anger, he gripped the heavy document with both hands and tore it squarely down the middle. He dropped the shredded pieces onto the wet floor right next to Sterling's expensive leather shoes. That silent, devastating action was the final nail in the coffin. Word would spread through the elite financial networks within the hour. By the time the stock market opened at 9:30 on Monday morning, the panic selling would trigger a catastrophic collapse of Aegis Horizon's public shares. Sterling's tech empire was officially bleeding out on the marble floor. Yet, amidst the spectacular public collapse of her husband's entire corporate legacy, Priscilla remained completely oblivious to the complex financial execution happening around her. Her blinding arrogance prevented her from comprehending anything beyond her own immediate, petty ego. She was still vibrating with pure rage, her designer dress stained with sweat and fury. She aggressively pointed her finger back at me, her face contorted into a hideous mask of pure malice. "Are you all deaf?" she screeched at the frozen security guards standing near the exits. "Look at this disgusting creature standing here ruining my entire evening. I do not care about a broken water pipe. I said to fire her, grab her, and throw her out onto the street where she belongs. Do it right now." The club manager slowly turned his head to look at Priscilla. His hands were shaking so violently that he nearly dropped his digital tablet. He looked down at the encrypted legal documents that had just been transmitted directly to his screen from the municipal property registry, confirming the true identity of the new massive landowner. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a terrified, raspy whisper. "I cannot do that," he said, taking a slow, fearful step backward away from the Vance family. "Ma'am, this entire building, on paper, is currently in severe, immediate violation of its master land lease. The club is completely paralyzed, and the sole owner of the new holding company, the person who holds the absolute power of life and death over this entire estate, is her. The manager raised his trembling hand and pointed a single, shaking finger directly at me. The collective gasp from the elite crowd sucked all the remaining oxygen out of the massive ballroom. I did not speak a single word in response. I did not need to. Absolute silence is the ultimate weapon of the truly powerful. I calmly reached out to a nearby silver serving tray and picked up a pristine, folded white linen napkin. With slow, deliberate, and entirely unapologetic movements, I wiped the sticky dark red wine from my cheeks, my forehead, and my chin. I tossed the soiled cloth carelessly onto the floor. Then, my hands moved to the collar of my cheap, soaked polyester uniform shirt. I grasped the rough fabric and methodically unbuttoned it from top to bottom. I let the hideous, oversized beige garment slide off my shoulders, dropping it onto the wet marble tile where it belonged, beneath the humiliating disguise of a minimum-wage servant. I was wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored, jet-black silk designer dress. The heavy, luxurious fabric clung perfectly to my frame. Radiating cold, calculated authority, the invisible cabana attendant was dead. The Queen of the Ashes had finally returned to claim her stolen throne. I slowly ascended the 3 carpeted steps leading to the elevated VIP platform, my black silk dress flowing like dark water behind me. I turned to look down at Sterling and Priscilla Vance. Hundreds of the most powerful people on the coast stood frozen in absolute silence, watching the ultimate shift in power. For those of you who have not formally met me, I announced, my voice steady, clear, and echoing perfectly through the grand ballroom. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Nemesis Tide Holdings. As of this morning, my firm legally holds every single outstanding debt, mortgage, and environmental lease attached to this property. I own the ground you are standing on, and I own the water you drink. Sterling's face twisted into a grotesque mask of desperate fury. His tech empire was crumbling, but his massive ego refused to die easily. He lunged forward, stabbing a finger through the air. "You think you can play games with me?" he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "I have lawyers who will tie you up in federal litigation for 20 years. I have a personal net worth of $4 billion. I will crush you until there is nothing left but dust." I did not flinch. Instead, I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress and produced a thickly folded, official legal document bearing a very distinct government seal. I tossed it carelessly. It fluttered through the air and landed squarely on Sterling's chest before dropping to the wet marble floor at his feet. "You do not have $4 billion. Sterling," I corrected him with a soft, venomous smile. "Because the Securities and Exchange Commission froze all of your domestic and offshore assets exactly 1 hour ago. For the past 18 months, I have been quietly feeding the Federal Bureau of Investigation every single encrypted log of your illegal corporate kickbacks, your fraudulent accounting, and your unregistered offshore transfers. You are not going to call your lawyers. You are going to call a criminal defense attorney." Sterling looked down at the federal indictment resting in the puddle of melted ice. The color drained entirely from his face. The billionaire shark had finally realized he was swimming in a tank filled with his own blood. I turned my gaze slowly toward Priscilla. The woman who had proudly commanded this room just 20 minutes ago was now visibly trembling. Her custom gown stained with sweat and the very wine she had thrown at me. The arrogant, untouchable queen of high society looked incredibly small. "And as for you, Priscilla," I said, my tone dropping to a lethal, quiet whisper that somehow carried to the very back of the room, "you have spent years treating the human beings who run this facility like dirt beneath your shoes. Your money bought their silence, but your money is completely gone now." I listed her offenses slowly, tasting the absolute victory in every single syllable. Physical assault of an employee, willful destruction of club property, blatant, documented manipulation of internal accounting to bypass membership fees. Under the strict bylaws of this private institution, these are grounds for immediate, non-negotiable expulsion. "You cannot do this to me," Priscilla shrieked, her voice cracking in pure terror as she looked desperately around the room for any friendly face. But her wealthy friends simply averted their eyes, stepping backward to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of the Vance family. "I built this social circle. I am a Diamond member." "Not anymore," I whispered. From the same pocket, I pulled out a heavy pair of stainless steel shears that I had confiscated from the floral department, along with the gleaming solid metal Diamond membership card I had silently slipped from her dropped gym bag earlier that afternoon. I held the card high in the air so the entire ballroom could see it shining under the chandelier. With one smooth, violent squeeze of my hand, the sharp steel blades bit into the heavy metal. The card snapped cleanly in half with a loud, sharp crack. I let the two broken pieces fall onto the wet floor. "Your access is revoked," I declared, my voice echoing with icy finality. "Permanently." I glanced over at the head of the security team. He was a massive, stoic man who had spent the last 5 years silently enduring Priscilla's endless verbal abuse and humiliating demands. I gave him a single, subtle nod. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across the security chief's face. He stepped forward, flanked by 4 of his largest guards. They did not gently escort the Vances. They seized them roughly by the arms. Sterling tried to struggle, shouting empty threats, but the guards forcefully marched them backward out of the grand ballroom. Priscilla wailed hysterically, her expensive high heels slipping and sliding on the ruined marble floor. As they were violently shoved through the massive glass lobby doors and out into the suffocating summer night, Sterling frantically waved for the valet service to bring around his imported luxury car. The valet captain simply stood at his podium, crossed his arms, and shook his head. They were forced to walk, humiliated and completely broken, down the 3-mile, unlit private asphalt driveway, chased entirely by the mocking laughter and flashing camera phones of the elite crowd they once ruled. An hour later, the grand ballroom was empty, the guests having quietly dispersed into the night. I stood alone on the highest private balcony of the clubhouse, the cool, salty ocean breeze washing over my face. In my hand, I held a crystal glass filled with a genuinely exquisite, perfectly chilled vintage champagne. I looked out over the expansive, sprawling grounds. As the tiny, defeated figures of Sterling and Priscilla finally disappeared past the heavy iron security gates at the end of the property, I pulled out my phone and tapped a single command. Instantly, all across the massive 18-hole golf course, hundreds of powerful irrigation sprinklers hissed to life. The heavy streams of fresh, clean water shot high into the dark sky, catching the silver moonlight and falling like glittering diamonds over the thirsty, pristine green grass. The water had returned to the coast, the swamp was finally cleansed, and the crown had permanently changed hands. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.